think it took me a long time to figure out that it is, and then it took me a little bit longer to figure out why it is. I'm getting nervous now. When I was 16, so throughout my freshman and sophomore year, I was a part of the Spanish class. It was this teacher that came from Montana. She's non-native, and she was a powerhouse. She was a feminist, so I was all about it. And first of all, I want to just say really quick that the problem is that that it teaches authority. These teachers, the 80% of these non-native teachers or white teachers. I don't know why I'm beating around the word white, but it's problematic because we're taught that they're authority, and then when you go out into the world, you see them as authority, and that sucks. But I was in a Spanish class, and then I was a part of the Spanish club where I pretty much sold suckers at the basketball game for 2 years, and then I went to Spain out of that. But so we did our Spanish club. We went out to Spain. We toured around it, but we also went to Morocco in Africa, and we were a part of the the education EF tours, and we were linked in with these other schools in Kansas, and I think either Alabama or Georgia, somewhere way over there, and we got to know them a lot. But so by the time we took a bus over to somewhere, and then we got onto a ferry and went over to Morocco, and one of the teachers, it was right by me, we're in this bus, one of the teachers from Kansas had told my teacher, Miss Hamry, I hope that's okay that I named it up, just blank that. So anyway, so she's talking to her. Miss Henry has us. I really honestly look up to this woman, and she tells her, my students are really nervous about going to Africa because there's STDs there. They don't want to get an STD. It's dirty or whatever. And then Miss Henry said, well, why don't you let them hang out with some of my girls? They got the highest rate in the whole nation. But the thing is that she's part of that 80% of the white teachers that I learned by 10th grade that she's authority. I was probably about 21 when I realized that's a wrong thing to say. I didn't know that. I didn't know I could stand up to her, especially because I looked up to her. I don't even think she realized that was such a racist comment because she is so comfortable in her 80% at the school that I went to. When 80% of white people are teaching over 51% of non-white people, that's an authoritative, systematic issue that we need to talk about. And I'm so glad that I can be telling this truth right now. Thank you guys for your correct response.
Thank you for sharing that, Jacqui. Why is it problematic, especially for us here in Alaska? The easy answer to that is because it doesn't reflect us as Alaskans. And again, I don't want to fault the teachers either. I'm a teacher, so, I don't want to fault the teachers either because they're teachers too, right? And many of them are doing their jobs or are teaching the curriculum that was given to them too. So I understand all of that. Nevertheless, it is problematic because the students do not reflect the teachers, and the students definitely, the students definitely do not look like the administrators, and the students definitely do not look like the school board, and the students definitely do not look like, the Anchorage. What do we call the politicians in town? Assembly. Yes. And our people definitely do not reflect, our city leadership, and our people definitely do not reflect our state leadership. So, having said all of that, it's problematic in many levels, right? Because whose truths, whose automatic thoughts, whose automatic values, whose tendencies, whose languages, whose perspectives, whose worldviews, whose ways of doing things are going to be privileged, right? Whether intentional or not, right? Whose ways of doing and believing and surviving in the world will be privileged just by the simple fact that the people in power, the authority figures, the decision makers, right, do not reflect the majority of the people, right? So it's problematic already in that level. And we see this, and I've shared this in another panel that I was with Ayyu on before. We have, for instance, right now a strong emphasis on certain topic areas for our school children, right? Like there's a strong emphasis, for example, on STEM, right? Science, technology, engineering, and math, right? But I think, a critical and complete understanding of people's histories and of the United States history of colonialism, of wrongdoings, that needs to be a core part of the curriculum too, right? And we need to invest our time and our money into educating our children, right, with that true history and true modern day reality too, because it's not done, by the way, it's not just history, it's still happening to this day, right? Because, as I've said before, being scientists, and being good in technology and engineering and math, those are all great things. But if we do not teach our children a critical and true understanding of this country's painful history, then we're just going to have a bunch of racist mathematicians. Right? And I'm not sure we want that. We don't want that.
I love that quote. Along those same lines, what is really insidious about the privileging of a white Western perspective on history, art, math, science, all of the knowledges that make up our current curriculum in our American school system is that it's given to us under the guise of it being neutral. It's given to us under the fallacy of being an unbiased curriculum. But that has never been the case. And symptoms of that show up when there's pushback to try and make room for equity in the curriculum and equity in the teachings for our children. When people say, why do they get an Alaska Native Heritage Month? Where's my White History Heritage Month, right? When you get that kind of pushback that doesn't see or acknowledge that we are currently living under a white history system, under a white Western perspective of what knowledge is and should be for our children. And because that's hidden and under this guise of being neutral, we drink that Kool-Aid too. We're in this school system and then we're continually in this place of, adopting a white Western perspective as our own and not understanding our own history. That normalized whiteness shows up in all realms in our country. It shows up as pushback against Black Lives Matter and saying all lives matter. It's pushback saying, we can't privilege or we can't give preference to Native people or people of color by allowing for special teachings just for them. It reminds me of that saying, when you're accustomed to privilege, making room for equity feels like oppression. And we're constantly up against that dynamic of trying to make room. I'm literally going through this right now with my littles. My two younger ones are in elementary school, and my Bunnick is in 3rd grade. And if you don't know, 3rd grade is, in the Anchorage School District, the only time that all students go through a comprehensive kind of tour through Alaska Native culture. It's the only time. You might catch glimpses of it in different classes, through high school possibly, but it's really the only time that they talk comprehensively, quotes, about Alaska Native cultures. And, 30 years ago, I went through this same curriculum for the most part, and I remember it being the kickoff for my own experience of really intense bullying for being Native. I was beat up at school. I was beat down at school for being Native. And it really, for me, was a turning point where I became very ashamed of who I was and where I came from. And there was nothing in our education that would have showed me anything to be proud of. And so I was just talking with my 12-year-old a couple days ago, actually, because I was telling him how I'm working with my third grader's teacher to try and update the curriculum that she's about to go through, the same stuff I went through 30 years ago, because I'm so afraid of what it will do to her to read these teachings that say we're situated in the ancient past and that have this perspective of our village life as challenging and isolated, and that it's so harsh, and all of these, descriptors that don't describe the way we think about our lives and our homelands and the way that we've always thrived in those lands. So I was talking to him, and I was asking if he remembered when he went through that chapter, because my recollection of him going through that experience at school was a turning point for him as well. It was going through those teachings about Alaska Native people that I saw my son turn inward. And he has never come back out. When he's at school, he keeps to himself. He doesn't make connections with other kids. And he's been like that since that period of time. And I can remember when he was going through that, and I realized what was happening. So I reached out to his teacher and said, I want to come into the class and talk to the kids. And so I did. I came in and I was talking about our cultures and talking about how beautiful we are, and showing them some of our words, and they were excited. They were soaking it up, and they really wanted to learn more about it. But it didn't help my son. And so we were just talking about it last week, and I asked him, I said, what do you remember about that time? And he said, well, it was really embarrassing, because the way that they talked about us was like we weren't there, like we're invisible, like we died a long time ago. And I said, well, how did that make you feel? And he said, it made me feel like I'm not here. And I said, okay. I said, did it help when I came into your class? And he said, no. And I said, well, why didn't it help? And he said, I don't want to hurt your feelings, Mom. But before that, no one knew I was Native. And the things we were learning about Native people were embarrassing. And then you came in, and suddenly people knew I was Native. And it was like people could see that I was Native, and it was embarrassing. And I felt like he kicked me in the gut, but it was the truth of my son that I had to just really honor. And I said, okay, well, what do you think about that? And he said, I mean, I guess it's good, because after that, kids felt comfortable to ask me about Native things. So I guess that was good, although I didn't know answers to their questions, so it was embarrassing. And so, just really, this miseducation continues to impact the way that we see ourselves, the way that non-Native people see us and understand us. And those have very real ramifications when it comes to actual policies that impact us disproportionately. That when our state doesn't understand that like 90% of the resources that fuel the government's funding come from rural Alaska, not understanding that, then when it comes time to building infrastructure in rural Alaska, people acting as if that's throwing away money, like it's a waste of money to make an equitable investment in infrastructure, these things continue to have very real impacts for us.
Thank you guys for sharing that. The biggest question that I have for me personally coming into this conversation and into the film that I was working on was that my partner Amos, he has a 5-year-old named Joseph, and we are wondering, how do we teach Joseph about Thanksgiving and the true history of Thanksgiving? He's 6. He just turned 6 last week or the week before. So I wanted to ask you guys, as Inupiaq, our first teachers are our parents, and so there's there's some pressure I'm feeling. I'm like, okay, well, how do I do this?